Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Steven, as was introduced. I'm a QA automation engineer at Immunify. It's a Web3 security startup, and I'm mostly on the Web 2 side though. So it's QA still looks pretty normal where I'm sitting, but if you don't know what QA is, it's quality assurance. So think software testing. You're just talking about unguided user testing. That's often, we kind of do something similar when we first encounter a feature called exploratory testing, where we just navigate as if we don't know what the rules are and we see how it feels to use something. So it's kind of a similar, very, very valuable way to use a feature. So just don't look at the rule book first and see how things go. You might find surprising things, but yeah, as was mentioned, I'm into parkour. I have been working this year on getting certified as a coach, and part of that is I need to get a lot of hours, so I'm going to be getting those in the YMCA this fall. Pretty excited about that. I don't want to do parkour on stage today, though. I feel like that would be a little irresponsible. I'm not the best of course. But yeah, these are our two kitties. On the left, you've got Sadie. On the right, you've got Bean. She looks a little more scrungly, as we like to call her. And then that's Sam. She's sitting right there. That's my wife. And this was when we were in Victoria, British Columbia. It's really beautiful up there. This is Blue Shark Gardens. Looks very similar to my name. It's not spelled the same way. But I just wanted to start here by saying this is going to be a bit of a rapid fire presentation. Just try to take what you want from it and, discard the rest. It may not all be relevant to you, but I guarantee you're going to find at least one little thing that you might want to use later. And when I say don't, I don't mean that you should never do these things. I think that you just want to tread lightly with some of them because they may or may not work out in your favor in my own experience, but as with everything, your mileage may vary. So I like to start with this whenever talking about AI because I think we all went through these stages or are currently at one of these stages today, depending on how much we've used it, how much our job demands that we use it, stuff like that. And so each of these stages looks a little different. I started in denial. If you told me a year ago I'd be talking about AI and how great it is for some things, I would have laughed at you and said there's no way it's good for anything. What are you talking about? It's wrong all the time. But yeah, I really thought it was going to be kind of like a fad and you wouldn't really get a whole lot out of it. But it has gotten smarter and taken on new forms like Cursor, as was mentioned. You kind of move from that eventually into, I really don't like this thing, it seems to be better than me at some things, or like, these demos are really only convincing management. You know what I'm talking about, if you've seen these demos. That was totally staged. It's definitely not going to do that with my code base. But then, you kind of move into, well, I guess I have seen it be successful at some things, but not everything. I mean, it's not a silver bullet, nothing is. But you start to recognize some glimmers of hope that it could be helpful at automating some things for you, making your life easier. But then, that can eventually move into this hopelessness of well, if it's this good, maybe I'm not even needed here, and maybe I shouldn't be planning my career around this. But then, you move out of that eventually as well, hopefully. Hoping for all of you that you move out of that stage into acceptance, which is, it's tempered, right? Like we've had some important conversations about the limitations of AI and the biases inherent in it that present all sorts of dilemmas for inclusivity. But it can do stuff, and it has sped up a lot of my work. It doesn't speed up everything. There are some things that humans will always and rightfully be the bottleneck for, in my opinion. And I think one of those is definitely testing. It's hard to have AI test things that are meant for humans to be using, because it'll miss things that you kind of need creativity and intuition to really spot. So I'd like to start off with the testing side. I've kind of split these between testing and test automation. They're often conflated terms, they're not the same thing. Testing involves like critical analysis of things, whereas test automation is typically some predefined instructions that's being run on a cadence to verify very specific things in a specific setup. So yeah, if you're gonna automate all testing, you have a lot of work on your plate. But the testing do's, I've actually found some success. I think this was maybe my first hint at, I think AI could be useful at my job. Dependency upgrades. Those are very common occurrences in organizations. Think like React, there's like a new version coming out every year. And if you fall behind even a couple of major versions, some things stop working. But the change logs, the release notes, they have all this information that informs what could break in your code base. And these things are often tested in very uniform ways across any project. So AI is really good at things that have patterns. So you can tell it to do some web research, to look at the code diff, even if you're using a tool like Cursor. And it can pool all this context together and generate a pretty reliable plan for you to go and look at certain parts of your app, test it in these ways, and you're probably okay, as long as everything works right. It can also, in the process, help you spot your blind spots, which we know we all have. I know there are certain types of things I don't test for everything, and so AI will sometimes prod me, like, hey, you forgot to test accessibility here too, or performance might be an issue, so maybe do a quick load test here. And yeah, it can be good for that, just like a little reminder. This is an example of how that can look. So once you feed it in, you can ask it to spit it out like I usually do like a markdown formatted checklist, so I can just use it as like an interactive document. And this is just like the top and the bottom, this isn't the whole thing. But it's a really easily shareable format then, and you have high visibility for a whole team of what you're testing, and this happens in like 3 minutes. So it's really a handy tool. It gets you started, at least. It's not supposed to give you everything, but it gets you on the way without you having to like have all that friction of like reading the entire product doc, or it's still useful, but you can kind of move the pieces around in your process, Test more do's. I actually had a little light bulb moment about the screenshot analysis one during the last talk with the color blindness notes, like those charts. Screenshot analysis, I usually use it for copy checks to see if there's grammar mistakes, but you can also probably use it to check for color contrast and other things. AI is really good at analyzing images, so you can get a lot of information out of a picture. And that takes you less time to analyze it yourself. And you can also turn, like once you're done with that test plan that I showed earlier, you can turn it into like a friendly message that makes it easier for a non-technical audience to understand what was tested. I say don't use it for new features, even though I've actually started doing this a little bit as like a part of a bigger process, just to kind of get started with testing faster. Because there's a lot of extra context that goes into a new feature that you don't really have with a dependency upgrade. Dependency upgrades are, you're going to be testing existing features. There's not a lot of new complexity, and it's only specific areas of the app. But new features, they involve business context. They involve knowledge of which users are going to use it. There's a whole can of worms there, and if you're not, if you're trying to rely on AI for that, you're going to miss some important stuff. So I usually encourage people to do that with caution, but maybe use it as a starting point and be critical of where AI has missed some cases that you want to test. You also don't want to use it to write bug reports. By the time you teach AI enough about your application for it to write a good bug report with good steps to reproduce, you could have just done it yourself. So it's probably not worth it. And then deciding if something is a bug, you probably shouldn't let it do that, even though there's a lot of AI platforms that claim to be able to do this. Really all AI is doing is looking at maybe best practices or typical patterns of usage or how apps usually behave, but it doesn't know anything about your business or your users or what your team's plan was for this feature. So that's another one where you need so much context for it to give you an accurate assessment. You should just be talking to your team about this instead. Yes, pardon my French, but yeah, this is something I've tried to do. If you're more like you have more of a coding background as a tester, you might be, you might be a little tempted now that we have AI to fill in some skill gaps to just fix the bug yourself if you find a bug. I've had mixed success with this. If it's something simple that I would have fixed in my own applications back in the day, my kind of toy web apps, if you will, I could fix it pretty reliably. But if I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, I don't know why this is going on, I don't know where in the code this is happening, but hey cursor, can you try to fix this? And it'll usually do one of two things. It'll take forever with me fighting and like prompting back and forth with it, like, no, this isn't working, now you caused this crash, now this part's broken, and then eventually it might fix it, but usually won't. Or you'll end up in a situation where it fixes it, but the solution is so bad that by the time the developer's done reviewing it and giving you all the feedback, they could have just done it themselves and saved the whole team some time. So it's not usually a good idea. And then as far as test automation goes, I like to say that my favorite thing that I've started really using on my team is Cursor's concept of like these rules files, but they used to have, like, when Cursor first launched, it was like a .cursor rules file, which is like this big file where you put a bunch of like normal text or markdown text, just kind of giving AI knowledge about your project or about how your team likes to code or whatever you want, basically, and just throw it all in this one document, and Cursor will just like magically look at it before it does anything, and it's supposed to improve the output. Nowadays, though, it's being more understood that you want to separate concerns a little bit. Like maybe you have rules for how to interact with React components, or even going even more with like a more granular server components versus client components, or maybe you want to teach it how to deal with CSS specifically, and you have a bunch of like preferences for that. So each of these would go in like its own separate file, and that's a really good way to improve the output it gives without it, it kind of keeps it on the rails. And I've found this is really good for test framework architecture. So if you have like a bespoke framework at your company for test automation, you can teach it how it works, kind of like if you were training like a new employee how to use it. Most teams don't just use the thing out of the box as is, they always add on to it. I've also found it's really good at unit test generation and API test generation, because the blueprints are all there. Like it has, if you have the code base, again, not all testers have access to the code base, we do. We share it with the developers. And if you do have that set up, you can just look at well, there's the API where it's defined in the code, or that's the function I'm trying to unit test. And that's all the context it needs, because they're very deterministic kinds of tests, very predictable output. You just have to watch there for like making sure it gets all the scenarios that the business cares about. But that's much less difficult than doing it for end-to-end tests, which I'll get to. Vibe coding can be good. Custom CI pipelines and reporting. CI is continuous integration. This is where instead of running your test automation on your computer, you would run it in the cloud using something like GitHub Actions or Azure Pipelines. And this is something that is extremely well documented. They have great developer docs for all of these major platforms. They also have like tons of GitHub repos. I'm sure AI has been trained on at this point. So, I mean, if you need something to run your playwright tests, then, I mean, it's gonna know immediately what you need. And it's very simple for it to come up with that. Same with reporters. There's custom reporters, which have APIs that are very well documented. Playwright has one. I used Playwright's documentation on this as, kind of a starting off point to vibe code a Slack reporter for our Playwright tests, and it only took like a week. So considering I haven't really done anything like that myself, from scratch. It was pretty surprising how well it was able to design that with my experience level. I've also seen something interesting when I was running a boot camp. I launched like this really short-lived like QA boot camp where part of it was teaching how to use certain AI tools like Cursor. And one thing I saw a student do was go outside of the curriculum and actually try to make an automated test for Duolingo to see if they could get it to get past a lesson. And so what you can use AI for there is to answer very easy questions, right, about foreign language. So it was able to have, like, I guess it would locate the question on the screen, pass that as part of a prompt to Mistral AI, and then it would answer back, like, with one word what the response, like, what the translation of that word would be. And then you would just search for that word on the page and then click the button, and then it would, like, pass the question. Yay. So you can kind of automate smart apps like that would probably have been impossible to automate reliably before AI. It's just like one example. As far as the CI thing goes, this is an example of, something that took, again, like 3 minutes. Playwright gives you like this whole CLI tool to like spin up a new Playwright test framework for your team for any project pretty quickly, but you don't even need to use that because AI can just do it for you. I was able to just almost one-shot prompt this. It took a project with almost nothing in it and just spun up the entire Playwright thing with the GitHub Actions workflow from like zero. So it's something that I think has given juniors a lot of power now, because this is something that back in the before times, when I was working at Fetch, I would be like scared of touching anything with the pipeline because I wouldn't understand any of it. But it's pretty reliable now, so for better or worse, I guess. And then as far as don'ts go, generating end-to-end test code, this is harder because you need access to the browser for AI to really like understand what it's locating. And Playwright has launched a tool called Playwright MCP, but it is a little difficult to use for the uninitiated, and depending on how difficult your test data is to set up for your application, there's a lot of hoops for AI to go through before it can even log in and see your features. So if you have a static site, I think it's useful, but it's really, it's one of those things that, again, it might take longer than if you just did it yourself. And then deciding where to add test IDs. Test IDs are something we use in test automation to locate elements on a page reliably. And AI really likes to just add them to everything if you tell it to add test IDs. So you probably don't want to do that because then you're just going to be cluttering the code with a bunch of things you're never going to use. So again, probably just hand pick which ones you want to add those to. And then, I think we've kind of already covered this concept of, like, if you let AI make choices in your tests, especially whether the test passes or fails, you're going to end up with mixed results. You don't want a black box when it comes to tests. You want to know what is being decided and how. And so I usually just, as a rule of thumb, you don't let AI decide if the test is going to pass. You may decide in the middle to make a certain path, but you don't want to have it be like the final say. And I guess just to like end with some things to explore here, maybes. The Playwright MCP, I have played with it a little bit. I can't say for certain yet if it's going to be very useful as something I'm going to use for everything, but you probably want to, if you're in testing or test automation, you should try it out and just see how it works for your setup. But yeah, it can misinterpret things about your application or make incorrect assumptions. Visual testing tools, they kind of end up being like dashboards. I've demoed this at my last company, and like it'll capture literally every difference visually, and it'll probably it'll try to guess like whether it's a bug or not, but you end up having to manually review it anyways, so take that for what you will. And then you have tools like Mabel and Functionize that try to be the all-in-one, replace your QA team thing. I have heard not so great reviews about these tools in the sense that they might be over-promising. They're really just diff spotters for the most part, and they have this thing called self-healing for the locators that you use in your tests, which can be good if you never want your tests to fail, but maybe they should fail sometimes. So I don't know. I think jury's still out on whether those tools actually have value, but I don't think I'm the one to really say yes or no yet. I use these two kind of fun ways to use AI as a way to help me during development of tests or reporters. So this is like the Slack. When I was making the Slack reporter, I didn't want to wait for the pipeline to run for like 15 minutes to see if my Slack message looked proper. So I just had it, tell me, well, what's it going to look like based on the code, and it's pretty good at guessing that. So you could probably do that for UI components too, or any number of things. Charts and graphs. It can work sometimes. I'm not going to say it works every time, but I've used it before. And then, I know I'm going over a little bit, but I just want to say that everyone always says if you don't adopt these tools, you're going to be left behind, yada, yada, yada. We've all seen the LinkedIn rants before. I don't think anybody really needs to worry too much. You don't need to go outside your working hours and spend every waking moment trying to learn how to use AI to gain leverage in the new economy or something. I mean, look how long ago DALL-E was. It was 4 years ago. We're barely even in this yet. I think the hype is really huge, and it's making it seem like this has been happening for longer than it has been. So take a breath, just maybe relax a little bit. You can probably spend a few months of dedicated, intentional professional development time and catch up to most of your peers, even if you feel like they're eons ahead of you. You also don't need to use a million tools. I mainly use Cursor. I don't know. It solves most of my problems. I know there's a bunch of SaaS companies, a bunch of startups out there making new AI solutions for specific, and that's good. There's going to be specific niche use cases that benefit from that and from proprietary data sets and whatnot. But I mean, if you're just making UIs and apps, I mean, you can probably just use one of those IDEs. And it's your chat, it's also any of the models you like to use, they're usually in there. It doesn't have common sense either, so remember that. It might seem like it does at times, but you can always get it to contradict itself pretty quickly. So it's usually, Sean said, it's a mirror. Don't trust it to actually be intelligent, it's just a token predictor. It can be useful, but it's not a replacement for your own critical thought. And then the last thing I've kind of learned over this past year was, we all know this in engineering, that it's tempting when a new really shiny tool comes out to just try to find a way to use it for something, because gosh darn it, if I'm not using AI, what am I doing? But you don't need it for everything. And sometimes it's actually going to make your life harder. I mean, I don't know if you've been there, but I've had times where I'm fighting the prompt, I'm fighting AI for an hour, 2 hours, trying to get it to do something, and it ends up just failing miserably. I'm like, this would have taken me 20 minutes. So just, start to really recognize when those moments are, and don't let it be the default. There are AI-induced cognitive decline studies coming out. Just for what it's worth, that's another wormhole. I mean, can of worms, rabbit hole, they go down. So finally, pick one of these 3 challenges, I guess. Depending on where you are in your AI journey, one may be more appropriate than another, but I think that mine is probably 3, because I tend to be skeptical about certain things to the detriment of even trying them. You never know, AI can surprise you in good ways as well. So, there's my website. Thanks for, thank you, and I'll take questions.